Swing! Swing!
Did you know that this Valentine's Day will mark the 25th anniversary of Wayne's World? Man, we are right at it.
He created Dr. Evil, but never got credit. They were the comedic duo that defined a generation. Mike Myers and Dana Carvey, two rising stars from Saturday Night Live, crashed into mainstream fame with their offbeat, headbanging, slacker personas, Wayne Campbell and Garth Algar. What started as a quirky sketch on NBC's late-night lineup soon spiraled into a cultural juggernaut. In 1992, Wayne's World hit theaters and exploded beyond anyone's expectations. With over $180 million at the global box office and catchphrases like "swing" and "party on, Garth," the film wasn't just a hit, it was a movement. Fans lined up in flannel shirts and band tees, repeating lines that would echo through pop culture for decades. And at the center of it all were Myers and Carvey, two comedians with unmatched rhythm and a seemingly effortless on-screen chemistry. But while the world laughed along, backstage, the dynamic between the two wasn't quite as harmonious. Beneath the goofy wigs and iconic banter was a subtle power imbalance already taking root. The signs were quiet: glances, decisions, timing, and while few noticed at the time, it wouldn't be long before those cracks would widen into a rift that no joke could cover. Next, we pull back the curtain on how the magic started to unravel behind the camera. Behind the scenes of Wayne's World, the laughs didn't come quite so easily. As production ramped up, creative tensions between Mike Myers and Dana Carvey quietly began to brew. According to multiple sources close to the project, Myers quickly asserted himself as the dominant force behind the film. Though both stars had built the characters together on SNL, it was Myers who wrote the screenplay, and he intended to shape the final product down to the finest detail. Insiders described a process where Myers frequently rewrote scenes, often trimming or altering moments where Carvey's Garth character shined. Director Penelope Spheris reportedly found herself caught between two opposing forces: Myers, the script-obsessed perfectionist, and Carvey, the improv-driven performer who thrived on spontaneity and audience energy. The contrast in working styles was more than creative. At one point, Carvey even considered walking away. He had signed on with the belief that Wayne's World was a partnership, but as his screen time shrank and his contributions were sidelined, the tone shifted. The studio ultimately convinced him to stay, citing his commitments to Saturday Night Live and the chemistry fans expected. But something had changed. Production became tense. The two comedians began avoiding each other between takes. Scripts were rigid. Jokes that once flowed freely were now debated, rewritten, and often cut. Spheris was reportedly forced to shoot several scenes in two versions, one for Myers, one for Carvey, so that final edits could navigate their disagreements without escalating conflict further. By the time the cameras rolled, the collaborative spirit that had once defined Wayne and Garth was all but gone. What viewers saw on screen was magic, but behind it was a creative tug-of-war that neither side would win. And this wasn't the last time Dana Carvey would feel his role slowly slip away. 5 years after Wayne's World, Mike Myers introduced the world to a new character, one who would become just as iconic as Wayne Campbell himself. In Austin Powers' International Man of Mystery, Dr. Evil burst onto the screen as a bizarre, bald villain with a tight-lipped sneer, a pinky raised to his mouth, and a voice that felt oddly familiar. But while audiences were laughing, Dana Carvey was quietly stunned. In a 2013 interview on The Howard Stern Show, Carvey revealed what many had only speculated. The now famous mannerisms of Dr. Evil, the pinky gesture, the clipped voice, the eerie calm, were, according to him, lifted directly from his own long-running impression of Saturday Night Live creator Lorne Michaels. Carvey had performed the impression for years, both on and off set, often exaggerating Michaels' lip movements, speech rhythm, and aloof demeanor. For him, it wasn't just a gag, it was part of his comedic DNA. Carvey claimed Myers didn't just borrow inspiration, he built the entire character on that foundation without acknowledgement. No discussion, no credit, no thanks. It was like being robbed in broad daylight, Carvey said on air, his tone a mix of disbelief and restrained frustration. And no one seemed to notice. Myers never publicly responded to the accusation. In fact, he stayed completely silent. But that silence only fueled the conversation. Online, fans started comparing footage, Carvey's Lorne Michaels next to Dr. Evil's early scenes. The similarities weren't subtle. Forums lit up. Was it homage or was it theft? The industry remained divided. Some argued that no one can own a voice or a gesture, that comedy is built on layers of influence. Others insisted it was blatant plagiarism. But what mattered most wasn't just the creative overlap, it was the absence of respect. Carvey didn't want royalties, he wanted recognition, a nod, a simple line connecting his years of groundwork to one of the most memorable villains in modern comedy. Instead, Dr. Evil became a standalone brand, an empire of spin-offs, merchandise, and sequels. And Carvey? He was left behind in the shadows of someone else's success. But for Carvey, this wasn't the first time his contributions felt erased, and it wouldn't be the last. As the 1990s drew to a close, the paths of Mike Myers and Dana Carvey split, sharply and publicly. The duo that once shared the screen as equals now occupied opposite ends of the Hollywood spectrum. Myers soared. With the Austin Powers trilogy, he not only cemented his place in comedy history, but also proved he could carry and control a multi-million-dollar franchise on his own terms. Myers didn't just star in the films, he wrote them, crafted multiple characters, and wielded total creative authority. Audiences couldn't get enough. Box office numbers climbed. Merch flew off shelves. He had, by all accounts, become a one-man empire. And then came Shrek. In 2001, Myers lent his voice to the green ogre that would redefine animated film. The franchise raked in billions and earned accolades across generations. Critics praised his versatility. Studios gave him full backing. Myers became a household name worldwide, largely on the strength of characters he could call entirely his own. Meanwhile, Dana Carvey's spotlight dimmed. Following Wayne's World 2, Carvey's attempts to break out with solo projects fell flat. His 2002 film, The Master of Disguise, was widely panned and failed to make a dent at the box office. Critics slammed the performance. Audiences didn't show up. The buzz that once surrounded him had vanished. Hollywood, it seemed, had quietly moved on. Carvey retreated from the film industry and returned to stand-up comedy, the stage that had first launched his career. He made appearances on talk shows and took up voice work, but nothing reached the cultural impact of his early SNL days. While Myers headlined global franchises, Carvey entertained in smaller rooms, away from the Hollywood machine. It wasn't just about success, it was about control. Myers had built a system around himself, where every line, every frame, every edit passed through his hands. Carvey, ever the free-form improviser, had no such infrastructure. He thrived in spontaneity, but struggled in a landscape increasingly dominated by branding and IP empires. The difference wasn't just in the roles, they had chosen entirely different paths. And as Myers became the symbol of creative ownership, Carvey became a cautionary tale about being left behind. But despite the growing gap in fame, the bitterness between them hadn't faded, and soon it would bubble up in the most. For years, Dana Carvey kept quiet. No interviews, no accusations, just the occasional, pointed silence when Mike Myers' name came up. To the public, it seemed like an old friendship that had naturally faded, until 2013, when Carvey finally broke his silence. The stage was the Howard Stern Show. The audience? Millions of listeners tuned in for the raw, unfiltered truth. And Carvey didn't hold back. Speaking with Stern, he laid bare what had simmered beneath the surface for over a decade. He described the creation of Dr. Evil as a moment not of admiration, but of betrayal. He explained, calmly but firmly, how Myers had co-opted his Lorne Michaels impression and built an empire on top of it, without credit, without conversation, and most of all, without consent. The world saw a genius character, Carvey said. I saw something taken from me. He didn't yell, he didn't threaten lawsuits, but he didn't hide his resentment either. The iconic pinky to the lip gesture, that, he said, was his. The odd clipped voice, lifted from his repertoire. And the worst part? Myers never once acknowledged it. Not in interviews, not in private, not even with a casual nod. Mike Myers, true to form, responded with nothing. The silence was deafening, and it only fueled speculation. Across Reddit threads, comedy blogs, and fan forums, debates ignited. Some insisted Carvey was overreacting, that comedic impressions are communal currency, passed around and reimagined. Others believed Myers had crossed an ethical line, claiming a creation that wasn't truly his. But the issue wasn't just about a character. It was about acknowledgement, about respect. Carvey wasn't chasing credit, he was chasing closure. And when that never came, the narrative shifted. The once inseparable duo were no longer just ex-colleagues. They had become the face of a rift, defined by silence. And that silence spoke volumes. But in Hollywood, even fractured friendships find ways back to the stage, especially when the cameras are rolling. In 2019, fans of Wayne's World were treated to what looked like a dream reunion. There they were, Mike Myers and Dana Carvey, on stage at the Oscars, side by side once again, reprising their iconic Wayne and Garth personas. Dressed in their classic flannel and wig combos, they introduced Bohemian Rhapsody to roaring applause. On the surface, it was a nostalgic throwback, a feel-good moment engineered to charm both old fans and a new generation. But look closer, and the cracks were impossible to miss. There was no eye contact, no improvisation, no shared glances, private jokes, or warm interaction that hinted at any genuine camaraderie. Their chemistry was rehearsed, the lines recited, and once the segment was over, they parted ways without a word. Backstage, there were no joint interviews, no behind-the-scenes laughs, not even a single photo of them together outside the spotlight. Then came 2021. During the Super Bowl, the Wayne's World duo resurfaced again, this time in a high-budget Uber Eats commercial alongside Cardi B. Fans cheered. The ad was a hit. But again, there was no real interaction between Myers and Carvey outside of the frame. No joint appearances, no follow-up interviews. Each filmed their segments separately, timed to perfection, then disappeared behind their respective PR walls. Carvey said nothing publicly about the reunion. Myers remained as silent as ever. To the public eye, it was a feel-good comeback. But to those who knew the history, it was little more than performance. A moment carefully constructed to sell a product, not heal a wound. And behind the makeup, wigs, and marketing dollars, the distance between them was as stark as ever. The message was subtle but clear. They could work together if the cameras were rolling and the money was right. But friendship? That remained out of frame. And while the world applauded their brief appearances, the real story was happening offstage, on a podcast where Carvey's words cut deeper than ever. In 2022, Dana Carvey returned to the public stage, not with a blockbuster film or TV comeback, but with a microphone and a podcast. Fly on the Wall, co-hosted with fellow SNL alum David Spade, quickly gained traction. Fans loved the behind-the-scenes anecdotes, celebrity guests, and nostalgic deep dives into the golden age of Saturday Night Live. But tucked between the laughter and reminiscing were quiet moments, comments that didn't name names but spoke volumes. In episode after episode, Carvey would talk about certain people in the industry. People who wanted all the spotlight. People who couldn't collaborate, who rewrote scenes just to feel in control, or never said thank you when you gave them your best material. He never said the words Mike Myers, but the connections were impossible to miss. Listeners began to read between the lines. The stories about controlling co-stars, being edged out of projects, and losing creative credit matched too closely with what had already been said in interviews and whispered in fan forums. And Carvey's tone? Calm, measured, but unmistakably wounded. For many, the podcast became a platform of subtle reckoning, a place where Carvey could speak his truth without starting a tabloid war, a place to process, through humor, the unresolved fallout from a partnership that once defined his career. And while Myers was rarely mentioned directly, his shadow loomed large. Listeners online speculated that this was Carvey's way of reclaiming his narrative, of voicing the pain he once held in silence. The comedy was still there, but behind it was a man who had learned that sometimes the people you work closest with are the ones who leave the deepest marks. And just when the wounds seemed to be scabbing over, a reunion opportunity, 50 years in the making, would open them all over again. In 2025, Saturday Night Live marked a milestone, its 50th anniversary. It was billed as a monumental night, an evening of celebration, nostalgia, and full-circle moments for the legends who once ruled Studio 8H. The guest list was a who's who of comedy icons, and among the most anticipated appearances was the reunion of Mike Myers and Dana Carvey. At least, that was the plan. Carvey had been publicly confirmed to appear, scheduled to reprise his role as Garth alongside Myers' Wayne in a special anniversary skit. But when the cameras rolled, Carvey was nowhere to be seen. A statement from his team cited illness, a bout of the flu that kept him from filming. And officially, that was the end of it. Unofficially, speculation exploded. Fans flooded Reddit and SNL forums with theories. Was the flu just a cover? Was the idea of sharing the stage, again, with Mike Myers, too much for Carvey to stomach? After all, the history between them had never truly been resolved. And what happened next only added fuel to the fire. Just weeks after the anniversary show, Myers returned to SNL in a surprise sketch, this time portraying none other than Elon Musk. But for longtime viewers, something felt off. The voice, the cadence, even the peculiar eye movements all echoed a familiar performance. Fans were quick to point it out. The version of Elon Musk that Myers delivered bore an uncanny resemblance to one Carvey had done previously in a podcast segment and smaller sketches. Was it a coincidence, an homage, or yet another quiet case of style borrowing? The internet didn't wait for answers. Forums lit up with side-by-side clips and breakdowns. Commenters revisited old accusations of appropriation, drawing lines between Dr. Evil and now Elon Musk. Myers offered no clarification. Carvey made no public complaint. But the timing and the optics spoke louder than words. What was meant to be a celebration of shared legacy ended with one man on stage alone, delivering lines once echoed by another who chose not to appear. And as Myers closed the skit in a flannel shirt, calling out, "Party on, Garth," to an empty stage, the silence that followed said everything. And behind that silence, a deeper truth lingered. Some wounds don't heal with time, they just learn to keep quiet. By 2023, Dana Carvey's public persona had shifted. The high-energy comedian, known for wild impressions and unfiltered wit, began showing something else: vulnerability. In a tearful interview on Good Morning America, Carvey opened up about the most personal loss of his life, the death of his son Dex from a drug overdose. Though he avoided specifics, the pain was visible in every word. Carvey spoke softly about grief, about healing, and about choosing peace over bitterness. It was a side of him the public hadn't seen, and one that made many reflect on the decades-long tension with Mike Myers in a new light. "I've come full circle," Carvey said, when asked, indirectly, about his past. "I'm focused on my own projects now. I'm in a good place." There were no name drops, no digs, no overt forgiveness, just a sense that he had moved on, or at least was trying to. Myers, for his part, remained characteristically silent. No statement, no tribute, not even a social media post acknowledging Carvey's loss. For many, that absence spoke volumes. Some tabloids speculated that Myers had reached out privately, but no confirmation ever came, and neither man chose to address it. The rift between them, once colored by career jealousy and creative frustration, now sat quietly beneath something far heavier. Life had moved on. The spotlight had dimmed. And while the public still debated the comedy feud, Carvey seemed more focused on finding peace than winning a war. But peace doesn't always mean closure. On his podcast, Carvey's tones softened. The barbs grew fewer, the metaphors more reflective. He still spoke of people who take too much space in the room, but he also joked more gently, choosing nostalgia over narrative. In the background, Myers continued to appear in film projects and voice work, still iconic, still elusive, still separate. It was clear now, whatever friendship had once existed wasn't going to be repaired with a phone call or a reunion sketch. If reconciliation was ever possible, it hadn't arrived, and if forgiveness had come, it was unspoken. But their final chapter wasn't written by headlines or hashtags. It was etched into the silence that followed them, the distance they maintained, and the legacy they left behind. Mike Myers and Dana Carvey didn't just make people laugh. They shaped a generation of comedy. From Saturday Night Live to Wayne's World, they brought to life characters that became cultural icons, etched into the memory of the 90s and beyond. But behind the wigs, the catchphrases, and the sold-out theaters, their story was never about just success. It was about something far more fragile: trust. What began as a creative partnership ended in a decades-long silence. A silence that outlasted the box office numbers, the award shows, even the reunion commercials. And while fans still speak their names in the same breath, the reality is far different. Myers built an empire, carefully controlled, precisely scripted, and fiercely protected. Carvey, the spontaneous firecracker, found himself on the outside, looking in. What he wanted wasn't fame or fortune, it was recognition, a moment of honesty, a nod to what was shared before things went sour. He never got it. Their paths diverged. Myers became a franchise juggernaut. Carvey leaned into stand-up and podcasting. Occasionally, they appeared together, but only when it served a production, not a personal reconnection. The laughs were real, but the warmth was missing. And after each public appearance, they quietly retreated into their separate orbits. Even now, in 2025, the space between them remains. No joint interviews, no candid backstage photos, just a handful of scripted performances held together by nostalgia and necessity. And yet, maybe that's the lesson their story offers, that even the most iconic partnerships can be undone not by one dramatic moment, but by the slow erosion of trust, credit, and communication. That behind every punchline, there's a person, and sometimes the cost of silence is greater than the cost of speaking up. They once created something no one else could, but legacy, it seems, doesn't always walk hand in hand with loyalty. So if you ever laughed at Wayne and Garth, if you ever mimicked Dr. Evil's Pinky or quoted "Party On," know that behind those laughs was a story just as complex, just as human, and just as fractured as the industry that made them stars.